Welcome back to another episode of Locked In. This is episode 28. I have another guest for y'all today. We have Matt Krause, play-by-play broadcaster for the University of North Carolina women's basketball team. Thank you for coming on, Matt. I appreciate it.
Bro, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you.
Most definitely. So when did you first realize you had a passion for play-by-play broadcasting?
Man, probably somewhere around third grade, to be honest with you. I was that kid that loved sports, was never any good at actually playing it.
Right.
So I decided to gravitate toward just watching as much as I could and, memorizing all this information and statistics about these players, and decided very early on that I decided to, pursue this as a career, and really have never looked back since that early age.
And just talk a little bit about your upbringing, let the people know where you're from, you know, just how it was growing up there and things you had to go through as a young child.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., for those not
Okay.
familiar. And, I was the first one in my family to go into anything like this. Parents had quote unquote normal office jobs, but I decided that I wanted to get into sports broadcasting, like I said, at a very early age. So I started working with a collegiate summer wood bat baseball team in Alexandria, the Alexandria Aces, when I was 13 years old, I believe. And then went, going through high school at Bishop Ireton High School, right outside DC as well. Got into public address announcing for the football, basketball, and baseball programs there. And so basically my whole childhood, like I said, was built upon, chasing this dream. And I'm really lucky that my parents are really, really supportive of this situation. And they, really pushed me to pursue this dream. And they were supportive financially and emotionally through the years while I was growing up.
Right. So talk about attending Elon University and then having to transition into calling TV and radio for the men's football team. Talk about that experience and just how that molded you.
Yeah, for sure. So when I was looking at colleges, I had gotten some advice from people in the industry because, like I said, I was one of those people that knew exactly what I wanted to do growing up. Now, let me say that there is absolutely nothing wrong with people that start college or even are close to finishing college and don't know what they want to do with their lives. I think that's really important, that just because this was something that's been a passion for me and I got started at an early age does not mean that any person that wants to perhaps pursue broadcasting, whether it be play by play or other realms of the industry, is somehow behind just because they're in college already and just realizing this. But that being said, I had gotten some advice from people in the industry, that the number one thing that someone needs to look for when they are picking a college and want to get into play-by-play broadcasting is experience. Because even though so many colleges across the country have communications programs and communications degrees and the various subsets therein, there's really no classroom education for play-by-play broadcasting, much less any sort of a major. And Elon offered perhaps the best combination of ability to get on air in various roles very early on as a student there, with that classroom education in a communication school setting. And I have family in North Carolina, even though I grew up in Virginia. My grandparents are not too far away from Elon, so I'd been coming into the state for my entire life and really wanted to spend time down here. Really liked the campus, so that was kind of the icing on the cake. But the big thing was the opportunities. And so, while I was a student, I took full advantage of that. And I was the lead broadcaster for the women's basketball program there at Elon on their flagship radio broadcast, which happened to be the student radio station. So many Division I programs have an actual, for lack of a better word, an adult that calls the games.
Right.
But at Elon, the lead broadcast for women's basketball is on their student radio station. And so through that, I was able to get involved with the athletic department and call some other sports. And I met a gentleman by the name of Taylor Durham, and he is the lead play-by-play voice for football, men's basketball, and baseball there at Elon. And I called baseball games with him when I was a student. And then he had an opening 2 years after I graduated. So the summer of 2017. I guess 18 months or so after I graduated at that point. But he had an opening on the football broadcast for his sidekick. And he was, pleased enough with my work that I had done with him when I was a student. And I was able to get into a Division I football job as a result. And at the time, at age 23, when I did my first game that fall at Toledo.
So here's another question I have for you. Talk about your experience doing that first game, like you said, against Toledo, and
Mm-hmm.
just talk about, since you getting your foot in the door, with the Division I men's football team. Talk about the different roles, and responsibilities that you have doing play-by-play broadcasting.
Yeah. So obviously, that first game, I was familiar with the athletic department, and I had covered the football team for the student newspaper. And, I had a kind of a talk show centered around the football program on the student radio station. So enough people knew who I was. So that was an aspect that was not a big problem, so to speak, going into that first game. But there's definitely a sense of responsibility. But luckily, thinking back to that game, I feel like I was pretty relaxed for it. So
Which you should have
that was good.
been.
Not too nervous for a stage like that. I mean, my one memory of the game in terms of what happened between the lines is, they're an FBS team, so we were getting paid to go up there and play them. And we were within 12 at the half as a 19-7 game. And we had stopped them 4 times in the red zone. It was one of those games that could have been 35-7, but then we'd held them to field goals. So we're like, all right, we're in this game. And then their opening kickoff of the second half ran it back for a touchdown, and they went up 26-7 and never looked back. And the guy that ran that kickoff back for a touchdown, kid named Deontay Johnson, might have heard of him. He's gone on to the league playing with the Pittsburgh
Right.
Steelers. So that's kind of cool. So that's the connection there to game one. So my role there with the football team is a little bit unique because, like you said, Zabril, I am a trained play-by-play broadcaster. That's where my career goals lie. That's where the majority of my work is. But also, like I mentioned earlier, Taylor is the lead play-by-play voice at Elon. So basically, on that football broadcast, I do everything except call play-by-play. And normally on a bigger school, a Power 5 school, or an NFL broadcast, you'd have somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 people that are on air and talking. The play-by-play voice, but then you have a color analyst and a sideline reporter and a pregame show host and maybe a pregame show analyst that also chimes in during the actual game broadcast itself. Since we're an FCS school, we have 2 people. And so there's the play-by-play role and there's everything else. So I do color commentary, not well, because mind you, I told you, even in high school, I was doing public address announcing. So it's not like I was playing football at that level. I've never played organized football at all. So I don't have that instinct or knowledge of a player or a coach. But there's ways to work around that with telling stories and playing off of what the play-by-play announcer says. And, you can pick up enough X's and O's knowledge by watching as much through the years. But also, I host that pregame, halftime, and postgame show on the radio. So a lot of supplemental coverage around the game, going in and out of interviews, providing analysis and context, scoreboard updates and the like. And then with 4.5 minutes to go on the game clock in non-COVID times, obviously, I leave the booth in the second quarter and go down and do a sideline interview coming off the field with a wireless microphone. So, I'm part sideline reporter, part color analyst, part broadcast host, analyst. It's everything under the sun. So it's kind of cool in that regard because, there's really no way I would ever be qualified to do color commentary in any other capacity, in Division I football like that. And then I also get, to try my hand at the hosting and the sideline reporting. So I think that that's something where when they had that opening on the broadcast in 2017, they wanted someone who was more of a trained broadcaster than someone who would give you the hardcore X's and O's, if that makes sense.
Most definitely. So I got a chance to, do a little bit of research, and I read you say you did play-by-play broadcasting for the Carolina Olympic Sports ACC network.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, they talked a little bit about you working in the minor league baseball teams and transitioning into
Yeah.
Learfield IMG College Network. So just talk about all these different experiences because, this is helping you grow as a play-by-play broadcaster. You know what I mean? Talk about all those experiences and, what you've learned from them and how that has, helped you into the person and play-by-play broadcaster you are today.
Yeah, for sure. You know, the interesting thing about all this is that a lot of these various experiences that I've had have overlapped on a timeline, if that makes sense, because so much of sports is seasonal, especially when you're just starting out in this business. You have to work, year round in different capacities just to make ends meet, which is a really good thing because you're getting as many reps as possible. So Learfield IMG College, which is, for those that are not familiar, it is a third-party company that is a multimedia and marketing conglomerate in the college sports landscape. And in very broad oversimplification terms, colleges sell the rights to their radio broadcasts and their in-stadium signage and other anywhere you can put a logo to this company, and the
Right.
company pays the university, and then they go out and they sell the sponsorships and turn a profit off of that. So Learfield IMG College is one of a few of these companies, but it is the behemoth in the college sports landscape. And so, like I said, they control the radio rights for, the University of North Carolina and Elon and so many other schools around the country. Yet their radio headquarters, there's two facilities that they have where they're production hubs. And those production hubs are one's in Jefferson City, Missouri, but another one is in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is maybe an hour west of Elon. It's probably 90 minutes-ish from where I'm sitting right now in Chapel Hill. And I was able to, through my connections with Taylor and with, knowing people in the industry, get in over there while I was still a student at Elon, and
Right.
I was able to do a lot of behind the scenes work. There was limited on air roles there in that I would occasionally come on and give scores in a 2 to 3 minute update. Here's a look at the scoreboard from across the country. It's presented to you by Pepsi. And just give you top 25 scores. But I learned so much about radio production and how to work the technology and the hardware and the software that's involved with putting on a high level broadcast like that. And I call that my master's degree in broadcasting. Like,
Right.
yeah, obviously I don't have a master's degree, but to succeed in this, you need to get so much experience. And that was the master class, because I got to sit there night in and night out and listen to some of the very best in the country call football and men's basketball and baseball on these huge networks, whether it's UCLA or Washington or Georgia, just to name a few that are huge schools. And I got to be, my job was to sit there and listen to these play-by-play broadcasters call play-by-play. And so just by osmosis, it makes you better. So that was what I was doing in the fall and winter and spring of, kind of those years right around when I graduated college. But also, like you said, I had a stint in minor league baseball with the Burlington Royals. Obviously now minor league baseball is kind of reshuffled its structure, and that's been a huge storyline in the sport this off season. But back then, rookie ball was still a thing. So pro teams would have affiliates that would play 68 games from late June through late August or early September, thereabouts. And so Burlington it's a town in North Carolina that's right down the street from where Elon is. If you were
Okay.
someone from the region, you'd say Elon's in Burlington. It's in the town of Elon, but right down the street. So Burlington Royal is probably 15 minutes from Elon's campus, and I was lucky enough that they had a role there where they had a seasonal job for their radio broadcaster. And it started out as just, contacting them and knowing the right people. And, uh, I sent them basically a cold email. And the first time I interviewed for it, they brought back their previous person for another year. And then I landed that position in 2014 and spent 4 years with them and learned an awful lot, because minor league baseball, that atmosphere, while I was calling play-by-play there versus, the production experience I talked about at Learfield IMG College, um, I was the broadcast person there. There was no other person that was remotely trained in this field. So I was thrown into the deep end with minimal training. It's like, here you go.
Right.
So that taught me a lot about preparation and just kind of how the pro baseball world is structured. And it was a lot of trial by fire. But you learn pretty quickly that in minor league baseball, the result on the field night in and night out does not really matter at all, especially at that level. You're playing to develop the players, and the team is trying to do their best to pack the stands and turn a profit for folks looking for a fun night out. And it just so happens there's a baseball game going on. Now, all that said, our team, my third year there in 2016, was pretty good and went to the league championship series. But still, you have to value things way more than wins and losses, and you cannot cover a minor league team like you would cover a major league team because the wins and losses just don't matter that much.
Right. So just talk about COVID. COVID affected a lot of things for a lot of people. Did that affect you any type of way in the whole, you not being able to go to maybe the studio to, work on certain things? Did COVID affect you in any type of way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, number one, I missed out on the tail end of basketball last season, and then a heavy majority of my spring sports load. My baseball, softball, and lacrosse at UNC, we were done March 12th. So
Nice.
typically my working season goes through the end of May, but obviously we lost out on that. And then Elon is an FCS school. FCS teams have not been playing football this fall. So, we, on the day that we are recording this, we just had our football media day, which is normally a July thing, on January 27th. And so
Right.
we're getting ready to play football in the spring. So the fall, my normal load was, I think I called 3 games of Olympic sports in the fall. And so that was just a real bummer because you don't feel like anything's going on. Like, yes, college football was happening, but at the bigger levels. But then as far as, when games do happen, I'm not courtside for basketball games. The only
I don't
games
mean
are,
to cut you off, but I know that must be bad, especially being at North Carolina where your rival is Duke.
yeah.
Just missing games like that. Have you ever got a chance to call a play-by-play game for Duke?
Yeah, I've called 2 Carolina Duke women's games in Cameron Indoor, 2 of them in Chapel Hill, and a Carolina or a Duke Elon men's game in
Oh
Cameron.
man, how was that experience? I know those games be crazy. So
Yeah, those are cool. I mean, obviously you're packed in there, and it's quite the experience to see that fan base. We never seem to play very well over there, so fingers crossed that we can change that whenever we do get to play over there again. Duke has opted out of the rest of the season for women's basketball, so they've bagged their season. We don't get to play them this year, but hopefully on the flip side, we can play better, kind of silence that crowd a little bit. But that is one of the more unique atmospheres for sure because you get to appreciate a lot of history being in there.
most definitely. And then what would you say is your most memorable play-by-play game that you've called?
Whew.
I'm pretty sure you have
Rob.
a lot of memories.
Oh yeah. So, my first year at Carolina, our women's basketball team played number one Notre Dame, and we beat them at home. And it was one of those things where we were solid. We were an NCAA tournament team that year, but probably because we won that game. It was one of those things where we were hovering around the bubble before, and we had been really inconsistent. And Notre Dame was on their way to the national title game that year, and we had a couple of veteran players that really stepped up. and it was just a surreal experience to be part of a win over a number one team in the country. And then 1 week after that, we went on the road and played NC State, who, like Duke, is a rival. I would say in basketball, it's a different energy in that rivalry versus the Carolina Duke rivalry, but it's definitely still a game that's circled on the calendar. And there's, among the fan base, there's a big desire to win that. And NC State was undefeated, 21-0. And we went into their building and beat them. So that was a kind of cool 8-day stretch my first year. And then last year we beat NC State again. They were undefeated again. It was earlier on in the season, and it was at our place. But they were still something around 14-0, 15-0, something like that. And so that's 2 years in a row that we had given them their first loss of the season. So those have been some fun games to call.
And then the last thing I'm going to ask you for this interview is, who does Matt want to be remembered as? What do you want your legacy to be when it's all said and done?
I want to be remembered as someone that entertains and informs. I want listeners to always be able to tune into one of my broadcasts and know that I'm going to tell them what's going on, who is doing it, provide stats and stories in context, and not make you wait for the score, especially on radio. You don't want to make the listener wait for your score. So I want to be known as someone who is really solid in the nuts and bolts of the craft of play-by-play, but also I want to be known as someone who's entertaining, because ultimately sports are supposed to be fun, and sports are an escape for so many people. I'm lucky in that it's my job, and hopefully it can be your job someday too. But in the world, sports are an escape. So I want people to enjoy listening to my broadcasts, and whether that's by having a laugh, feeling the emotion when I get excited over a big play, I want them to be entertained, but also I want them to be informed. And I just want to make sure that I, stick to that line. And that's what I want my relationship with the listeners to be. But then with the coaches and athletes that I cover, I want to be someone that they can trust, and be able to tell their story and, do them justice by telling their stories, and to be able to paint them in a positive light on the air, and be able to be someone that speaks on their behalf while they showcase their talents, on the fields and courts. I'm the one that then represents their voice in that circumstance.
Y'all heard it from Matt himself first, man. First of all, I just want to say I appreciate you once again for coming on the show and just honestly having you as a mentor. You basically giving me advice and tips and things like that, looking out for me. I definitely had to have you on here, and we'll definitely be doing a lot more things soon, hopefully. But y'all heard it from Matt himself. Y'all make sure y'all check him out as a play-by-play broadcaster for the University of North Carolina women's basketball team. And I wish you nothing but the best moving forward, and nothing but success for you, man. And that's it for episode 28 of Locked In. Before we end today's episode, I want to let you guys know that this episode was sponsored by Off the Hustle, where you can't be a hustle without ambition. Go get all your merch and clothes from odhapparel.com. And that's it for episode 28 of Locked In. Tune in for next week's episode.